Hi folks, in this video I'll demonstrate how to get started with CSS. If we navigate to the CSS section of our website. So CSS is really meant to style our HTML content. And so for this demonstration, we're gonna style this simple website, and that's what the website looks like. And we're just gonna add some style to it. The easiest way is just to color the text. That's the simplest way to kind of see the effects of the styling. So there are three ways, common ways of adding style, adding CSS. You can do it inline to the code. You can do it in an internal fashion where the styles only apply to one style sheet, or you can do it where the internal version is the style is defined in the head of the page. And then lastly, the external is when the CSS is defined in an external file. External CSS is the preferred method, but I'll go through the other two methods just for completeness and awareness. So let's start with inline first. So for inline, you'll notice that the style is embedded within as an attribute to the CSS. I mean, as an attribute to the HTML. So let's do that. So right now, if I refresh the page, there's no style to any of the line items. And I will just add a blue style to the first line item. And then you'll notice it's set to blue. So so that's how you do inline. Pretty straightforward. The main reason to not do main inline is it really makes your HTML really busy. So they taught it's good practice to kind of separate out the style from the content. And also you'll notice that the style is only applied to one of the line items. So if you needed to apply to the second line item, it will you'll have to repeat the style again. So that's some reasons why not to use the inline version. So let's try now for the internal version. So here you'll notice that the style is defined within a style tag, and then the style tag is defined within the head tag. So let us first create the head tag, and then we'll create the style tag within it. And now we can define our actual CSS. And let's just take a brief moment to explain the syntax. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to select the list item and add some colors to it. So instead of a heading 1 tag, we're gonna select or target a list item tag, and let's just do something simple like red. So the syntax of CSS is really, you have the selector, the tags that you're targeting, and then your property, your declarations, which are the property and then the value. So if we look at some basic definition or basic syntax, here you have the selector. In our case, it's the list item, the li, and then you have declarations within the curly brackets afterwards. And you can have multiple declarations. Of course, they'll have different properties, but you can list them and separate them by semicolons. For us, we'll just stick with color, and let's refresh our page and see that the red is applied to the list item. However, inline styles have higher precedence, and they're called specificity in CSS, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So to show you that without this inline, all the list items would be blue. So we refresh, or red, yeah. So this declaration applied to all the tags li. But let's just keep this inline here for now. We'll refresh and you'll see it turns back to blue. So now let's go over the last way of adding CSS, which is in an external CSS file. So let's create another page. So to show you why external CSS is useful. And we'll just copy this over. We'll delete the style, the inline, and the internal CSS. So the first page stays the same. And if we are to then open up the second page, you'll notice that it's not styled at all. We could copy and paste the contents of head into the other page, but again, one of the tenets of software is to not repeat yourself, be dry. So don't repeat yourself, DRY. And so instead of copy and pasting, one way to do it is to use an external style sheet. So let's do that now. Create another file of styles, CSS. And within it, we'll just copy and paste our style. And then for the external, let's make this green. But before the style can be used, the style sheet needs to be included into the page. So to do that, we need to put this link tag inside our head section. And let's comment out this style for now. And make sure we link it up to the correct style sheet. And if we are then to refresh, sorry, typo, styles, we should see green. And again, because of the inline style, it is overriding the external style sheet. So if we were to erase the inline, they'll both be green. The second page don't have the style because we haven't included it in. So let's do that now. So we included the external style sheet and refresh, it'll be green as well. So that's how we would inject CSS using the external style sheet. And the same style sheet can be reused on multiple pages. So that's one of the benefits. So now let's put back the inline as well as the internal. So specificity is one way to ensure that your intended style is applied. This is the best way to do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. For now, because the external style declaration and the internal have the same specificity or specificness, whichever is last declared overrides the previous. So we switch the order and then refresh. Of course, the inline is the most specific, but you notice that it's no longer red. This declaration is overwritten by the declarations in this file. So order does matter if the specificity is the same. So because ordering things gets a little tricky and tedious as things grow, making sure you manage it through specificity, that's the best way. So, okay, now that we understand the basic syntax of CSS, we can move on to maybe talk about more about the specificity. And then when you're troubleshooting, it's good to use the developer tools again, like we did for the HTML. So this will actually tell you that it's blue, and you can troubleshoot by turning it off and on and see how it affects. And you can see which one's overriding which. So that's a good tool to use and leverage. Okay. And then these other styles is the default for the browser. So each browser comes with a default style, so it's good to overwrite them. There is this thing called CSS reset where you include it and it'll kind of like overwrite all the defaults of the browsers to kind of keep it all consistent. Most frameworks will kind of do this for you now. This is a really old practice because what we're doing now is very antiquated. However, it is the simplest way to learn. So that's why we're using this method. Okay, so let's talk more about specificity. So essentially, this is the definition, and it goes through how to calculate it. Basically, the more selectors you have, the more specific a rule is. And this second article has a great depiction of this. So this is the inline style. If there are any inline styles, it will have a rating of 1, 0, 0, 0. And then ID is the second most specific. On each page, there should only be one ID. Then the class, and then eventually the element. So this li is called a element selector. So this page goes through some example calculations, so you can learn more about specificity there. So now let's just go through some examples of selectors to kind of showcase the specificity. All right, let's add a few more line items here. And we'll target this with an ID. Unique. List item. And so we go to our CSS. If we were to try to target the ID, you need to use the pound sign to denote that is an ID. So, and then with the pound, we then follow it with the ID name. And then this is our selector. Then we add in the properties. So with the ID, let's make this yellow. And then we go to our page. We don't need this anymore. It's hard to see, but that is our ID. So that's one selector, and it overrides the other selectors because IDs are the highest specificity besides inline. So we already did the element, which is the list here. Class is the next most common one. So class is, to denote a class, use the dot. And let's see. Let's make this class name warning. And color that as orange. And the benefit of a class is that you can use it multiple times, whereas ID is meant to be used once. So we can say warning and give it the attribute name class. and just sprinkle it in. We'll say warning 1, warning 2, warning 3, and because they all have the class name warning, they should be all styled the same. So here you see it all being orange. And then attribute is another very common way to select your HTML tags. So let's give that a shot. Let's see, attribute name, attribute 1, attribute 2, and attribute 3. Here, they're styled just like any other list items until we actually give it a make a CSS rule to target it. So the syntax for attributes is square brackets. So we were to try to target that attribute name, put it inside square brackets, change this color to gray. And if we refresh, the attributes are changed to gray. You can also give it an attribute value. And then target it by that as well. And I believe for the attribute value selector, you just supply the delimited by an equal sign. So attribute value, and give it the value name. And we'll make this purple. Refresh. Second one has the matching value. Okay, and you notice that because this is a little bit more specific, it overrides this one, which is a little bit more generic. Okay, so that's attribute name and with attribute value. Though these selectors here is parent child and ancestor descendant. So that's when you start nesting HTML elements. So let's give this a shot here. So this will be descendants. Let's do parent child first. Parent child. Call this the parent. Call this the child. And we'll say child 1, child 2, and child 3. Okay. Let's do that. And let's give this one a class so that we don't accidentally target this first unordered list. So parent, child. Okay. So anything with a class parent, child that has a child of a list item, we'll color that. What colors do they give? Let's try. Let's try. Just an easy one to see. Let's do pink. So now the children of the parent is, so the list items are the children of this unordered list tag, which has the class parent child. So this is the parent and this is the child. And whatever's matching it will have these styles. Okay. So we will try to do the same thing with ancestor descendant. Because this didn't match the parent, it picked up the previous style of the normal list items. Ancestor descendant, and let's give it a different color. Should we do? Let's just do aqua. This autofill is okay. It's nice, but it kind of gets in the way. So now we refresh, it'll be blue. And you can't tell the difference, but the child is really, the parent child is really for one generation. Whereas the ancestor descendant will be all future generations. And to emphasize this more, we can add more generations, and you can see that this is like a tree, right? A graph, right? That's what they call it, a DOM. So okay, let's do that. Let's actually create some extra descendants. Let's see. So that'll be children. This would be a grandchild. This would be a great grandchild, depending on how you count it. So we were to duplicate it here. Okay. That's a little funky. This list is still considered a child, or more like this is still considered a child, so that's why it's still styled as pink. Okay, so here you see the parent-child style taking effect, whereas this one, the ancestor descendant is taking effect. Oops, actually, but that for ancestor descendant, there's no greater than sign. There, that looks right. That looks better. So anything that's an ancestor of this class will be aqua, whereas this will just go one generation deep. And then after that, it will revert back to the style for all the list items that we specified. In here. I guess to not confuse things. Oh, that's okay. Okay, so we've gone through parent-child. So here we can apply multiple selectors. Let's do that. Add a paragraph. Here, the paragraph is styled normally. But if we were to say list and paragraphs are supposed to be green, then it'll be styled as green. So that's multiple selectors. And lastly, compounding. So we were to say, so here's the unique list item here. We can actually compound it, add to the specificity. So we'll actually overwrite the yellow color. So compounding unique. Actually, let's try it this way instead. So in addition to the warning class, if there's another class, say error, we can compound it like that. If you wanted to throw in the ID, you could, but you should only have one ID, so that's just kind of weird to use. Let's see what color. Let's do brown. And here, so you need to have warning and error before it's brown. So here it overrides. So this is more specific because we're compounding classes. And so that's why it overrides the orange. And you can do the same thing with attribute names. So if we wanted to say attribute name, to make it more specific, we'll give this a class warning. And that should turn it brown as well. So attribute with class. So here is brown as well. So yeah, there's just so many ways to combine selectors. It has just a ton of flexibility. Of course, simple is better, so try not to get too crazy with it, but it's there. And those are the common selectors and common ways of combining them, and it showcases the specificity. The last thing will be kind of the box model. So each item, how CSS kind of looks at it is kind of a box. So you can I would really think of it as the border. You can border an element, and then inside the border, the spacing between the border and the content is called the padding, and the spacing between the border and the next element's border is the margin. And the easiest to visualize that would be with divs. So this page is getting busy, so let's use the second page to demonstrate this. So if we had a div, we call this the outer container or outer box. And then we have a nested div, and we call this the inner box. And then we have one more. We'll call it the inner sibling box. So we need to go to another page URL. So here, the outer box encapsulates both the inner and the inner sibling. So for this one, we'll show you how to add a second style sheet, box styles, and we'll create a new file called box style CSS. And of course, you can put it into a subfolder like how we did with HTML pages. But for simplicity, we'll keep it all flat here. And we'll say the div, all divs will have a border, and we'll give it 1 pixel. And make it black. Let's see. I have to look up the CSS for the border property. Oh, I think I need to say it's a solid border. There you go. So if we add some margin between the borders, you can specify top, left, right, bottom margins as well. One margin will be all the way around. You'll see that the spacing starts to grow. And you can see that the inner borders, the inner boxes are starting to be spaced away from each other. And now if we were to kind of add some padding to this, 5 pixels, it should squeeze it even more. So let's see. Here's the padding. That's the border, and that's the margin. If we look at the inner boxes, so that's the content, that's the padding inside of the border, that's the border, and then margins outside. So you look at the sibling, content, padding, border, and then the margin. You notice that the margins overlap. So it's not a 3 pixel margin from the inner box and then another 3 pixel from the inner sibling box. They kind of just overlap together. And I think that actually works out well when they do the math that way. But the padding and the margin, if they do stack on top of each other. So here's the margin, and then this is the padding from the outer box. So that's the box model. So yeah, it's kind of very foundational for CSS. Make sure you understand that. And let's just say we didn't use the border. The only other way to kind of see the boxes is with background color. So we say divs that are nested as descendants of other divs, and we'll say background color is blue. Or let's just go aqua. Okay, so yeah. So even though the div has text here, it colors the entire box because of the way CSS does the box model of the CSS. So the last thing I want to say about the box model, related to the box model, is we use pixels, which is an absolute unit. So no matter how our font size changes, it'll still be 1, 3, and 5 pixels. So we made this 20 pixels, or 40 pixels. Let's just make all these 1 pixels. So no matter how big or small the font is, it's still 1 pixel. So it doesn't scale with the font size. Whereas there's these relative units that does scale. So if your page layout changes, the border and other things, in this case we're using borders and margins, but it could be other elements on your page, other styling elements on the page. So we changed it to the relative unit. If our font size is small, the border and the margins and stuff is small as well. But if our font size gets bigger, the border and the margins will scale with it. So it just allows you to produce a more flexible styling, and it just makes it a little bit more easy to manage instead of updating the pixel value each time your font size value changes. So I think that's all for the CSS section. Yeah, hope you have fun. You can really get fancy with it, and here's some more advanced CSS topics that you can do. And if you really like the visual front end stuff, you can get you can do a lot with CSS, and just makes with CSS you can make things look really nice. So have fun with that. Uh, you know, making things pixel perfect.